Okay, good. Let's go ahead and share the prayers for tonight, and Jana will kindly lead us in those. Let me get that on the screen. Great. Thank you, Jana.
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times. To
the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
Short mandala offering, once in Tibetan. Sajipo ki
Jukshen ta tra ri ra ne chi ne ya pa de sangye shen tu me te wa drona da sheva Chopasho Idam Guru Ratna Mangala Kamyataya.
Refuge in Bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly.
By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sangye
Chodam Soki Chokdam La Janchu Bardu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Chanyan Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchu Sangye Druparsho Sangye Chodam Soki Chokdam La Janchu Bardu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Chanyan Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sange Druparsho. Okay, great. Thank you, Jana. All right, let's go ahead and start with a short meditation. So as usual, spend the first few minutes just focusing on the breath to calm the mind a bit, trying to keep your awareness with the breath in whatever way that you're meditating on it. And when you see that the mind has wandered from the breath, just let go of whatever distracted you and guide the mind back to the breath. So actually, no, I was thinking maybe for those of you who don't know the 9-round breathing meditation, I thought maybe I'd introduce that because I want to talk about it as the antidote to distraction, which is coming up as the first of these secondary afflictions. So most of you may be familiar with this, but you're going to be able to do this on your own. But I'll guide you initially so that you have an idea of how to do it. It begins with a visualization. The visualization has its roots in Highest Yoga Tantra, where we are working with channels, these sort of hollow tubes in which wind energy flows. So there's three main channels that we're going to be focusing on here. And the 9-round breathing meditation involves 3 breaths to clear each of these 3 channels, each of these 3 that are, again, visualized in the center of the body. So the first one is the kind of central channel. The central channel begins at this point between the eyebrows, the ajna point, and it goes to the crown of the head and then descends down in front of the spine. And it's a little bit larger than the other 2 we're going to visualize, but they're all 3. They're kind of like straws, hollow tubes. So it kind of comes up again to the crown of the head like an umbrella handle and then goes straight down in front. All right. Then it comes to a few finger widths below the navel. The right and the left both start right inside the nostrils. And you have the right that is red, the left that is white, and they go parallel to the central channel, which, by the way, is blue. I forgot to mention that's blue. So they kind of run parallel to the central channel and track all the way down on either side of it, down again to the lower abdomen. At the lower abdomen, all 3 of them are kind of open and they have the ability to then kind of be manipulated. We're going to do different variations on what we're breathing in through and what we're breathing out of. But the idea is you begin with that visualization, that simple visualization, again, of right, red, central blue, and then left, white. And again, the left and the right are just slightly smaller tubes than the central channel. So what we're going to do is breathe in for the first 3 breaths through our right nostril and visualize that energy kind of coming down, going to the lower abdomen as you inhale, and then as you exhale, kind of breathing out through the left channel. And as you breathe out through the left channel, we're kind of clearing any of our anger energy. Remember, we've talked about the 3 root poisons. This is kind of that sort of energy kind of coming through the left channel. So we want to think we're dispelling that and kind of removing that, and it just disappears into space as we breathe out through the left channel. We're going to do 3 like that. Then we're going to breathe in through the left channel and out through the right. And when you breathe out through the right, we're breathing out all that kind of desire, attachment, grasping, craving energy. So we're kind of getting rid of all of that. Then we're going to breathe in through both the left and the right and visualize that energy coming down to the lower abdomen. And it's going to ascend up as we exhale through the central channel and breathe out all of our ignorance, all the confusion, dullness, what have you. So people find it convenient when doing this for the first 2 rounds of 3, in through the right, out through the left, to actually cover the nostril that they're not working with at that time. It kind of gives more emphasis to that particular breath. But if you're familiar with this and have some dexterity, you can breathe in through a single nostril, but it's a little bit harder to do. So again, what we'll do is we'll cover the left and we'll breathe in through the right. Bringing that down, then we cover the right and breathe out through the left. Again, expelling all of that kind of anger energy. Can do this again, covering the left, breathing in through the right. Covering the right, breathe out through the left. One more time on your own, covering the left. Covering the right, breathing out through the left. Now you can keep your finger where it is, covering the right nostril, because we're going to breathe in through the left now. And draw that energy to the lower abdomen, cover the left, and breathe out through the right. Again, breathing out all that kind of attachment, craving energy. Again, covering the right, breathing in through the left. Covering the left, breathing out through the right. And do one more on your own, covering the right. And covering the left, out through the right. You can lower your hand. You don't have to cover any nostrils because you're going to breathe in through both. Again, bringing that energy down to the lower abdomen. Breathing out through the central channel. Visualize sending out all of that ignorance, and that just dissipates into space. Again, in through both. And out through the central channel. And on your own, in through both, out through the central. Okay, so that was just to introduce that to you if you're unfamiliar with it. So what we'll do is we'll start the meditation and you can begin by doing this on your own. But let me see, are there any questions on again what we're doing? Just to review again, 3 in through the right, out through the left, then 3 in through the left, out through the right, and then 3 in through both right and left, and out through the central channel. So again, you're just visualizing with this, again, this kind of energy that you're moving through these 3 main channels that we have in the tantric teachings. So, all right, so we'll do that. You can do that on your own twice if you wish, if you just want to do it once, and then just whenever you finish, just go to watching the breath as you do normally when we do these meditations. So we'll start now. Now, with our minds a bit more focused, let's generate our motivation for our time together. And throughout this course, we've spent a lot of time focusing in particular on these unwholesome states of mind, the afflictions, those that do cause us to be not at ease, not at rest, to have a mind that is disturbed, afflicted, and moreover become the cause for us to create our own suffering, our own patterns of dukkha, this dissatisfaction that is a part of samsara. We've mainly been looking at them from the point of view of our own experience and our own needing to address these states of mind, to create antidotes to them, to lessen their power, and to eventually eliminate them through the wisdom of emptiness that undermines the ignorance that is driving all of these afflicted states, and that is keeping us bound in samsara. And we can start with that motivation for tonight, recognizing how problematic these states of mind are, and how we have to experience so many unsatisfactory things while in samsara, going from life to life, never knowing even a moment of peace. And generate that wish to be free of these factors once and for all. It's the mind of renunciation that wants to emerge from this cycle of suffering and dissatisfaction and achieve freedom, nirvana, peace. And because we've looked at these in ourselves, we can also see these afflicted states affecting others. So here we want to advance our motivation to include them. I think through our own investigation, concluding this course tonight, through everything we've done, we want to hold that motivation of using that knowledge to develop ourselves to the point where we can help others to remove their afflictions, to remove the root of ignorance, to attain their freedom, and moreover, to attain their true potential, the state of Buddhahood. And we hold that as our main motivation, wanting to benefit countless beings, wanting to lead every one of them to actualizing their full potential. But we recognize that to do that, we have to do the work on ourselves first. We have to become fully enlightened so we can lead others to that same result. This is that mind of bodhicitta, the wish to benefit others to the greatest degree, and the aspiration to become fully qualified to do that by becoming a Buddha, perfecting our own mind so we can help others to do this work. So hold that motivation for our last class here tonight, thinking again that everything we do then will become a cause to help us to achieve that result, our own enlightenment, so we can lead all others to attaining that same state. And open your eyes fully. Take a moment to come back into this space, and we'll begin. So I might mention that I do have a handout that I have put in the handouts folder, the link that you have that's on Siddhi-Garba's website for this course. This is the handout that's called the 9-round breathing meditation. They give 2 variations on this. The first one is what I mainly led you in, though it doesn't have the information about the 3 poisons, so I will put that in another file so you have access to that. But again, you do the visualization, and it talks about covering the nostrils and breathing out to clear the one channel and what have you. But again, it doesn't kind of line them up with the 3 poisons, so I'll have that in a separate one. And then the variation 2 is where you could imagine inhaling kind of purifying white light. So you can do it with another layer of visualization, kind of breathing in as you inhale, that white light coming down, and then that kind of pushing all the impurities of body and mind through and cleansing the channel. So you kind of imagine those impurities coming out in the form of black smoke, dark smoke. And again, but it's up to you, whatever you want to do. And you can probably do a different visualization if you want. The most important thing, though, is to have the 3 channels visualized as best as you can. In Tantra, they say these 3 channels are never completely open until the channel knots loosen the chakras. And so in this meditation that we're doing, we're not thinking about the chakras being there. We're just thinking about them being completely open, kind of creating the patterns for that to happen eventually. It does happen at death. And by the way, I will be doing a course on heart advice for death and dying starting next month. That'll go into June. So we will go through the death process as part of that course. And I'll talk a little bit about how Highest Yoga Tantra sees things happening at death in terms of these three channels in particular, and then also other elements that are involved in the death process. But in Highest Yoga Tantra, of course, you're trying to create this process through manipulating energy in the body through various yogic techniques, which again, I won't be going into as part of tonight or even that course, but that's kind of the basics of it. But these three channels are very important in the tantric teachings. Any questions on that meditation? Anything come up in doing it? It's said to be very, very good, and I find it very good to kind of clear some distraction, to, kind of get the mind a bit more focused. And distraction is the very first thing we're going to look at tonight. Let me introduce you back to reintroduce you to our little list of 51 mental factors. Again, this is the list that I put together. We are at the tail end of, let me page up just a little, we're in the 20 close afflictions. We had a few leftovers from that because recall that most of these are derived from the three poisons. At the bottom there, you see 5 from anger. Then we had 3 from attachment, and then 6 from ignorance or confusion. Then we saw at the bottom there, we went through these previously, the afflictions derived from both attachment and ignorance or confusion. And then we're in the final category, which are those derived from all 3 mental poisons, or the root afflictions, these 3 of anger, attachment, and ignorance or confusion. So we went through the last 3, or the first 3 in last week's class. We're now to distraction, but those 3, I just want to touch on them briefly again. With those 3, we're really talking about factors that we need to kind of keep us on the straight and narrow, to keep us doing what we need to do. And these are a lack of those factors, no self-respect, or, kind of having no real regard for our own desire to uphold the precepts of the Buddha's teachings and to live our lives in a moral and virtuous way. And then in consideration for others, not having the consideration for others that would be ideal to also keep us from refraining in negative behavior. And then the general kind of barrier, which is conscientiousness. If we lack that and, we have kind of reckless and heedless in our behavior, then again, we're not going to be kind of producing the causes and conditions that we need to make greater strides on the spiritual path. So those 3 all kind of work together, conscientiousness being a little more general, self-respect being more about oneself and upholding what we want to do ourselves, and then in consideration or lack of consideration, meaning that we're not being attentive to what others might need. So we need to have that awareness of behaving in accord with their wishes and what will be of greater benefit to them. The last one of these is distraction. Distraction, of course, can arise from a variety of things. And I might mention, we're going to see this coming up on the slides, but distraction in general isn't necessarily an affliction. We can be sitting down to meditate, and we can have the mind be distracted to even virtuous things, right? You might sit there and think about, oh yeah, I need to, make a donation to this organization or whatever. I keep forgetting to do that. And you might have kind of a movement towards a more generous mind or what have you. Those can be distractions in our meditation. They're not the affliction of distraction. The affliction of distraction involves these 3 poisons. Whenever we are trying to meditate and the mind gets distracted towards objects of attachment, which we already saw when we saw excitement, but excitement is a more specific form of distraction. But if we have kind of that drawing of the mind out to those sorts of pleasant things that we are attached to, or if we have the mind getting distracted towards people or situations that we're upset and angry about, or if we have the mind kind of spacing out into more neutral things that again might be furthering our ignorance, just really kind of wallowing in our ignorance, those can be problematic. But again, if it's a more wholesome distraction, which can happen at times, then it's really not a problem. But it is a problem in terms of generating deeper concentration, but it is not, again, the affliction. So let's take a look at how this is described, this last one of distraction. Distraction, Geshe Rabten says, is a mental factor that, unable to direct the mind towards a wholesome object, disperses it to a variety of other objects. It causes the power of concentration to deteriorate and acts as a basis for losing one's attention upon the objects referred to both in analytical and stabilizing or concentrated meditation. Recall, we have these two types of meditation we emphasize in our the system here of Tibetan Buddhism that we study. Analytical is where we are using the mind to investigate these things, which is what we've been trying to do throughout this course, is when we learn a bit more about these states of mind, analyze them and see what they're about, see how they're operating in your own life, see what sort of antidotes you might want to kind of put up against them to lessen their power, in your mind. And stabilizing meditation is what we do at the beginning when we're stabilizing on our breath. You can do that with regard to any object, but essentially it's really good to work with the breath because it's an object we always have with us, but you try to keep the mind single-pointedly focused there. That stabilizing meditation, again, is going to ripen into shamatha, or calm abiding, over time if we keep investing in it and eventually do even deeper meditative practice, perhaps in a retreat, most likely in a retreat setting. That we need to have is that very stable mind that can remain not really tightly focused, but at least clearly focused on whatever object we choose to meditate on. It's going to make the mind very powerful. But it has to be accompanied, again, with some form of analytical meditation. And the deepest analytical meditation we can do involves the wisdom of emptiness. But we can analyze many of the Buddhist teachings, and even what we've been doing in this course, like I said, analyzing the various states of mind and how they manifest, and becoming more aware of how we keep the negative states from arising and cause the positive ones to be more present. So again, distraction takes us away from that process. It causes the power of our concentration to wane. So let's continue with what Geshe Repton says on this. He says, it is a quality, distraction, ascribed to a state of mind in which the mind has been led away from the object of concentration by, guess what, our three poisons: attachment, hatred or anger, and then he always, this is translated by Stephen Batchelor. He likes the term bewilderment, or at least he did when he did this translation, for ignorance. Bewilderment, confusion, ignorance. I mean, we don't use the word bewilderment quite so much in our culture, perhaps, but it has that connotation again of just not being quite clearly understanding things. So some antidotes to distraction: reflect on the value of concentration and mindfulness, bring to mind the benefits of having meditative stabilization and what can be accomplished with that mind. And of course, even remaining stable on the topics we're analyzing, if we're doing analytical meditation, thus inducing a desire to achieve greater focus and attention in one's meditation. So sometimes it just means we have to kind of tighten the mind a bit. If the mind's going all over the place and distracted, got to bring it back down, bring it, to the object that we're focusing on by remembering the benefits. There's great value in having a concentrated mind. It's going to be the doorway through which we can do so much. And then the traditional remedies that are there for a distracted mind. This includes advice such as to focus your mind or your attention firmly on the breath. Bring it down to the breath, even if the breath isn't your meditation object that you're focusing on. The breath is a very powerful tool to kind of counteract the distraction, because again, if we focus on the breath, we're bringing the mind into the kind of closer to the body and what have you. It's not kind of wandering out to all these objects of distraction. So we're bringing it in and making it more stable. Also, to engage in the 9-round breathing meditation. As I said, that's why I introduced that to you if you were new to it, or reminded you of that meditation, but hopefully it's something you can incorporate into your meditation. As I said, I find it really useful to do it right at the beginning, so the mind becomes a little more focused and not so distracted, and then you can use it whenever you need to. If you're seeing that your mind is really unsettled all over the place and you can't meditate on anything, go to the 9-round breathing meditation. That may help a lot. Another one is to visualize and concentrate on a seed, a very small seed with a white top and a red bottom. You do that at the navel until the mind settles. Again, this idea of kind of bringing things down in the body. Distraction here, when we talk about distraction, we tend to be thinking about the mind wandering out, right? You got those two sorts of forces, the mind wandering out in a sense, being kind of preoccupied like a pinball machine, or the mind collapsing in on itself, which is the sort of dullness that we spoke about earlier last week,
right? That kind of dullness or heaviness that happens in the mind can be problematic for a lot of people because it makes the mind very thick, not so, vibrant. Makes our meditation really quite almost like going to sleep or something. Again, for some people, it can become that extreme. But there's a dullness, a lack of clarity and intensity to the mind then. So we want to be careful again about this, these two things. But distraction, when the mind's sort of out there, we need to bring it into the body, if you will, and even into a lower part of the body. So again, meditating on a point below the navel, around the navel, where you've got this small seed, white on the top, red on the bottom, is one way to settle the mind. And just stay focused there as much as you can until the mind settles. They even say that in some cases you might want to meditate on more sobering topics, such as in the Lam Rim, we have the topic of death, impermanence, suffering. If we meditate on those lower topics, well, then we can't get too excited about some of these other things that are objects of our distraction, because we realize again that these are serious things the Buddha is teaching that we need to kind of engage in wholehearted practice in order to overcome. Because all of these can be overcome. You can attain the deathless state. Impermanence will still be there in some way, but again, we won't have the suffering of impermanence. And then, of course, suffering itself, dukkha, all of these things. So that's the idea behind distraction. Let me go to Venerable Gyatso's thing here, because I did want to share a little bit about what he had, because again, he mentions this idea of distraction, not necessarily in and of itself being something that is non-virtuous or afflicted. It depends upon what types of things are going on. So he says here, distraction causes the mind to leap away from the virtuous meditation object and follow a thought related to the three poisons. That's what we saw again in Geshe Rabten's description. Distraction makes our mind unable to abide in virtue and is a major obstacle to attaining freedom from attachment, because we need strong concentration on a virtuous object in order to overcome the afflictions. So the next paragraph there is where he talks about, he says, if we're trying to concentrate and our mind starts thinking about healing the sick, I don't know how many people think about that, but maybe you do. This virtuous distraction is not the afflicted distraction under consideration here. The mental factor of excitement that, again, we looked at previously is an afflicted distraction that specifically goes to objects of desire. But again, we can have objects of desire, objects of hatred or anger, objects of even kind of our ignorance, confusion. So again, that should be clear. I think, what we mean by distraction in this case is an afflicted state where the mind is, getting caught up in these thought patterns that are not going to be very healthy, because they're going to promote more affliction in the mind. Whereas when we're meditating, we want to have less affliction and a diminishment of the affliction. So, as well as the single pointed focus that is so essential to doing both stabilizing meditation and the analytical meditation that we spoke of earlier. So any comments on that? Yes, Louis.
So this what he describes as a virtuous distraction, are these problematic?
Well, they're problematic in that they do still keep us from being focused on what we want to be focused on. But the advantage, I guess, that they have is that they're not virtuous. They're not afflicted. They're not leading us down a pathway where we're increasing our anger or all this. But they are problematic in terms of if we are really focusing on making the mind single pointed, they're not allowing us to develop that, because when we think about healing the sick or, being generous, writing a check to some, charitable organization that we want to support, those sorts of things are still going to be, again, keeping you from being on the object. So it's going to diminish your stabilizing meditation, your ability to develop shamatha. And it also will, again, be in the way of whatever we're analyzing. If we're analyzing, let's say, emptiness, and then, you start thinking about compassion. Well, compassion's a wonderful thought and very virtuous, but compassion is going to get in the way of meditating on emptiness, right? Mm-hmm.
Is it not possible for any kind of relative insight to be trying to make its way through while you're having this one point of concentration?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to say it's impossible, but I don't know that I haven't heard that it's as likely, certainly, because again, the tendency is for the mind to need to have that lack of distraction in order for it to penetrate deeply and for things to kind of hit home, if you will, and have that more profound effect on our minds. So it does seem like without that being present, it's just less likely that we're going to have the space for that to happen. Now, again, I'm not talking about, when I talk about making the mind really stable, I'm not talking about making the mind kind of like hyper, energized or whatever, to where it becomes almost a grasping at the object in a really tight way. Again, I sometimes use the example when I talk about meditation of an egg, an uncooked egg. You can grab the egg like this, right, to make sure you don't drop it, but you're potentially going to break the egg if you hold it too tight. But you can also hold the egg by just simply holding it in the palm of your hand, right? And the egg will not break, and yet you'll maintain your awareness of it and your holding of it. It's kind of like that with meditation, and of course, this is when it becomes too lax, is then when you just drop the egg because you aren't paying attention to the palm of where, you're kind of holding the egg upright. So the idea is that you want it kind of in that middle way again, where you're just holding the egg, not grasping at it, but not becoming so lax that it falls. So it's kind of, again, it's a state of mind that it should induce kind of what was the phrase you used of kind of these insights of, to be able to
Right, that
arise.
there could arise some kind of like relative insight that might arise while you're trying to have your one point of concentration. That could be very relevant or even beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, again, and those things, it's not to say that we shouldn't follow them. Absolutely, and if they kind of do take us in that direction, and we gain some benefit out of meditating on those and moving away from the practice that we've been doing, it's not to say that those are absolutely, forbidden or anything. It's just to say that if we are intent upon achieving a particular goal in our meditation, be it stabilizing or analytical, and those things come in, as much as it might be fruitful to take us in those directions, that's not what we're meditating on at that point. And so in that way, it does become a distraction, albeit not an afflicted distraction. And I think some of these, insights will come certainly when we have the mind more focused. So in spite of because that was what I was kind of alluding to, is that we want to, if we're working on particularly developing our stable mind, our shamatha and what have you, to really focus on that, even though there might be something fruitful going in that direction, to recognize that those insights aren't lost completely. I mean, they will still be there when the time and the conditions are right, when we can use that more stable mind as a tool to investigate those things. But it all depends upon what practice we're doing. I mean, if we're just sitting down and we're just, again, not having a really strong structure to our meditation, which is probably not that advisable, but nonetheless, sometimes that's the way it is, then maybe we can do a little more sort of free floating and kind of follow what goes on. And maybe, some relative insights will come out of that could be really useful. But in general, if we are, if this is the practice we're doing, if we say, okay, for 30 minutes, I'm going to do shamatha practice, then that's the practice we do. If these things are coming up and they're really strong, well, then we say, okay, I take note of it, maybe even, write it down or something, but I'm going to meditate on that later when I'm not doing this practice. Right. So that we don't end up interrupting the time that we're setting aside for a particular type of practice with other tasks, other things. That's what I've heard from teachers, but I don't know. It's not to say again that those aren't valuable. There is value in pursuing them, but in pursuing them in the right context, I guess, is the idea. So, any other questions or comments on distraction? Anyway, let's go back to what I wanted to conclude then. I had just a few more of the virtuous mental factors. Let's go to that list. Let me put that back on. That's again in that list of the 51 mental factors. We're going to go back up to, again, and these come before the afflictions, but as I said, I've been covering these. When I get to the afflictions that are counteracted by each of these. We talked about faith earlier in regard to non-faith, faithlessness, or whatever the word we would use for that. Self-respect, consideration for others. Those two we talked about in relation to the ones that I just touched on earlier tonight that are part of the afflictions that are the secondary afflictions that arise from all three poisons. Non-attachment, non-anger, and non-confusion. These are the three direct antidotes to the three poisons. So we spoke about them as well. Enthusiasm or effort, we also touched on in relation to laziness, the afflicted mind of laziness. Pliancy or suppleness, we're going to cover now. Conscientiousness, we spoke about again last week as well as at the beginning of tonight. Equanimity, we're going to cover right now. So we have those two. Non-harmfulness or non-violence we spoke about previously in relation to one of the secondary afflictions that arises from anger. So again, we've touched on all of these except two. So let's go to those two. Those two are quite interesting because they do both have something to do with our meditation. And you might see the word equanimity there and think that it's talking about the equanimity that we often meditate on, of a kind of equal mind or equal regard for beings, but it's not the same thing. We have several uses of equanimity in this tradition that are have slightly different meanings. So let's plow into that and see what we find out. So the first one that we're going to look at is pliancy or suppleness. Another word for this is kind of serviceability, but we're talking about a mental quality here now. So there is a physical aspect to this as well. We're going to see that, but we're mainly talking about the mind being more serviceable and pliable. Equanimity, again, is where we have the mind in a much more kind of unmoving state, where we're able to maintain our focus on the object without any need to adjust things. We'll talk about that in a moment. So this is how the Dalai Lama and Venerable Chodron talk about pliancy. Again, our suppleness, flexibility, serviceability. This enables the mind to apply itself to a constructive object, a virtuous object, in whatever manner it wishes, and it dissipates any mental or physical tightness or rigidity. So again, this is one of the things that keeps us from being able to have fully qualified shamatha. Shamatha, or calm abiding, is a state that, again, in the traditional teachings, I won't go through all of this tonight, but there are a couple of approaches to looking at how to develop shamatha, and one of them has to do with these 9 mental abidings or mental steps that take us all the way to developing calm abiding. And we go through a process of sort of refining our attention and letting go of coarser distractions first, and then the subtler distractions and so on, and even, removing laxity and these factors that make the mind dull and heavy. But you end up fine-tuning your concentration through this process. But nonetheless, we don't have a mind that's completely serviceable until we get to the top level, which is calm abiding. Your mind will be much more serviceable as we move through these 9 stages. But nonetheless, when you get to that final stage, that's when pliancy actually takes place in a more profound way. It begins with a sort of mental pliancy that is developed, which induces a physical pliancy, meaning a suppleness in the body. On the basis of that, we then have a physical form of bliss that arises, and then a mental form of bliss. So again, I'm not going to go into the whole technique of developing this, but when this whole process has happened and you've gone through the sort of physical and mental kind of releasing of anything that's going to be inhibited to your meditation, then you arrive at this place where you've got fully qualified calm abiding, and you have the mental factor of pliancy or suppleness together with a physical suppleness or pliancy. Again, in this context, we're really only talking about the mental side of it, but the physical side is arising kind of at the same time or very closely, after. The physical one is where you kind of get a serviceability of the body. Normally for most of us, when we sit to meditate, you start feeling kind of aches and pains in the bodies over time. Things are starting to get a little, for being rigid and not moving around, a little sore or whatever, getting pains in your joints of your knees or whatever. All of that goes away when you develop this physical suppleness, so that you have a body that seems like it's almost floating. And then the mental factor of it is that you have a mind that is extremely, again, that idea of flexible. It can move wherever you want it to. It doesn't have any sort of resistance to it. So again, I'm talking about it in the third person. I have not experienced these states, so don't think that I have. I'm giving you teachings that I've had from other teachers, but we all can attain these states. In fact, it's said that we have attained this many, many lifetimes. We just never did anything having attained that. We used it as kind of a nice place to be, because it is a very pleasant place to be, they say, in that state of having this type of pliancy. But it doesn't lead to anything on its own. Nonetheless, it's usually done in the context of developing some constructive meditation on, again, a virtuous object, or at least a neutral object like the breath, that is intended to be using that for spiritual practice. Geshe Rapton describes it this way: suppleness is a distinct mental factor that has the effect of enabling the mind to apply itself to a wholesome object in whatever manner it wishes, as well as interrupting any mental and physical rigidity. It has the function of purifying mental and physical rigidity and acts as a basis for all meditations directly associated with mental quiescence, which is the translation term Stephen Batchelor used for shamatha, calm abiding, and penetrative insight, which is vipassana, the special insight into all the analytical topics, but mainly emptiness. So again, the mental part of it is the main thing being talked about here. It mentions the physical rigidity that is overcome, but recall that we're talking about a mental factor here, something in our minds that we have tasted in other lifetimes, but until you develop calm abiding, you don't really have that fully qualified. Yes, the mind's much more serviceable as you move through these stages, but has to become kind of fully pliant, if you will. Mental and physical rigidity is an inept state of mind or body, in which one is incapable of doing what one wishes. It is a seed that gives rise to all forms of afflictions. Suppleness overcomes any heaviness and rigidity and makes the mind very flexible and quick. It goes on to say, then, one is thus enabled to use the mind in whatever way one wishes, whether to solve an intellectual problem or to concentrate upon an object of meditation. Through practice, this quality can also be developed in the body, giving one a sense of extreme physical lightness and well-being, as though one were floating in air. Sounds pretty desirable, right? To have bodies that are having that sort of experience rather than what we tend to have in our sitting meditation. He goes on then to qualify this, as I said earlier. The suppleness of body, though, is only a specific form of tactile sensation, and is thus not to be considered as the wholesome mental factor of suppleness or pliancy that we're talking about here. Likewise, it should be noted that suppleness only refers to the supple quality of mind that refers to wholesome objects. So you have to be kind of doing a more virtuous meditation where that suppleness is present for it to be fully qualified as that mental factor. Because remember, all 11 of these that we're looking at the last two, again, in suppleness or pliancy and equanimity. All of these are of a virtuous nature. They're wholesome mental factors, virtuous mental factors. So they have to be together with some sort of virtuous motivation and intention. I suppose that somebody could develop, calm abiding and, have a very highly developed state of mind and use it for ill will. I mean, I suppose it doesn't seem that likely. When you get to know your mind, hopefully you don't want it to go in those places, because those places are disturbing. And to develop calm abiding involves lessening those to a large degree, right? Because they're not arising in the mind then. The mind is very focused and very free of any of these distractive states of mind, any of the afflictions and so on. But nonetheless, we can have that and just like meditate on something neutral. You want to be developing calm abiding or shamatha to deepen your practice of the Dharma, to deepen your spiritual realizations. That's kind of the whole gist of it. Otherwise, again, nice to have, nice experience of feeling that, but it's really not an end in and of itself. It is a tool that we use to develop deeper awareness of reality, both conventionally and ultimately. The other one that I mentioned that is part of meditation as well is this mental factor called equanimity. Equanimity does not allow the mind to be greatly affected by restlessness and laxity without having to exert great effort to prevent them. Restlessness is another term for excitement, laxity, this kind of more lethargic, dull state of mind. Remember when we talked about dullness, we said that it's not quite the same as laxity. Laxity is a subtler form of that. But these are the two kind of, again, powers in our mind that are causing us to be drawn outwards with greater attachment and so on, as well as to kind of be drawn within and sort of collapse in on itself. These two are the factors that keep us from having stable concentration as well as kind of clear, intense focus on the object. So important for the development of serenity, it says, equanimity enables the mind to settle and remain on a virtuous object. This equanimity differs from the equanimity of the four immeasurables, which I alluded to earlier. That's an even-mindedness that we want to have towards all beings. That's another use of the word equanimity. And the equanimity that is a neutral feeling. Even in some texts, they talk about a neutral feeling as being a feeling of equanimity. So what we're talking about here is more specifically, this is not a factor that comes into play until you've gone much further in your development towards calm abiding. Remember I said how there are like these 9 stages? When you get to like the 8th stage, which I think is called abiding in equipoise, the idea is that at that point, you don't have any of these distractive states arising. You don't have the excitement. You don't have the laxity. You've quelled them. You've caused them to not appear in the mind. Doesn't mean you've gotten rid of them for all time. It just means that they are not going to arise and interfere with your meditation because of the progress you've made towards moving towards calm abiding. You've been used to, prior to that, putting the antidotes to any of the times when excitement or laxity arise. So you've been constantly adjusting the mind. Remember, I think I used that example last week, right, of in Little Buddha, where the man's playing the stringed instrument on the boat. Did I use that last week? I don't remember where I used that. In Little Buddha, the film by Bernardo Bertolucci, he has the Buddha comes out of this meditative practice when he's been practicing asceticism, and he goes down to the river and replenishes his strength by drinking some water. And he sees these 2 men on a boat. One has a string instrument, and he's trying to get it played correctly. And he tells the other one, if you make the string too tight, it'll break. But if it isn't tight enough, if it's too lax, then you can't get it to play. And so this kind of is this is the Buddha's sort of, formulation of this idea of the middle way. That's what we're doing even in our meditation, is we're not trying to make the mind too loose to where laxity and other factors diminish our intensity and clarity to the mind. But you don't want the mind too tight either to where you're going to get the potential for all these other distracting factors to come in, excitement and what have you, even at a subtler level. So you kind of have to find that middle way balance in between. Equanimity is really alluding to that state of mind that you sort of want to hang out in, where you're not needing to apply any sort of antidotes because those things are no longer any disruptions to your meditation. So you don't really notice equanimity as kind of a place of rest and to be kind of in that space. Really, in a more profound way, it says until you get to that 8th level, heading towards calm abiding, because it's at that point where you need to just sort of coast. You just keep staying with the object. You don't have to worry about it getting kind of fuzzy and dull. You don't have to worry about it getting excited and tight. You just coast and stay in that place. It's a mind of balance, of equanimity. That's what is being referred to here. And it's a virtuous state of mind because, again, you're hopefully meditating on a virtuous object as your object for developing calm abiding. Though, again, many people might use the breath, but you're doing it with virtuous motivation. So it's, it is a virtuous practice. So it is in that way a virtuous mental factor. But the idea here is that is different than the equanimity that we've discussed many times in classes here, where you're trying to make the mind even towards friend, enemy, stranger, as well as the equanimity that is a neutral feeling where we're just not feeling anything that's pleasant or unpleasant at that moment. To go on, he says, Geshe Rabten now talks about it and saying, again, a distinct mental factor that, without having to exert a great effort to prevent excitement and sinking, again, terms for the same 2 factors we talked about, excitement and laxity, sinking, does not let the mind be affected by them It is a quality ascribed to a state of mind in which detachment, non-hatred, non-bewilderment, and enthusiasm are all present, right? Because you don't have the arising of the root afflictions, the root poisons. You're able to be with non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance, and you have this enthusiastic kind of effort that is there keeping you moving in that direction without the need to, again, address any of these factors that would take you off the meditation object. It has the function of settling and leaving the mind in rest upon a wholesome object. This term rest, it's kind of interesting. And you were there, John, for the Rasmus's presentation to the North American regional meeting. He emphasized this word rest, and a lot of he cited, I didn't realize how many texts, certainly we hear it in a lot of different traditions, that they kind of say, now allow the mind to rest. It's kind of what I was saying, that you don't want to have this sort of super tight kind of focus mind. The mind is very clear and stable. It's not without a doubt. That is a vibrant mind that you are producing, but you're kind of in this place of rest almost. So it's kind of interesting. Geshe Rabten was alluding to the fact that you have this enthusiasm or effort there, or maybe that was His Holiness, but it's not like a really strong kind of that type of effort. It's just the ability to stay with the process, to try to keep seeing it through. Because it's at this point, as you go through these various levels, the 8 levels that we're at the 8th one now, you have developed this mind of equipoise, this mind that can stay on the object, and you just need to hang out there. Then you get to kind of the 9th level where you don't even need any effort to kind of go into meditation. You just sit and the mind's there. It's on the object. And you might think you have calm abiding, they say, but you need to get that pliancy that we just alluded to earlier. That's the demarcation of moving from the 9th level to calm abiding, fully qualified mind of shamatha. So the idea is these factors play a role much further on in our meditation practice, but we can already see like the kind of shadows of them, if you will, those spaces where you sort of hang out. I remember when I first started studying Tibetan Buddhism, the first book I encountered was Sogyal Rinpoche's book of Tibetan book of living and dying. And he talks about in there about the gap. Like you have kind of this gap between the thoughts where you kind of want to hang out there. You don't want to be in that place where you're sort of getting distracted by all the various things that are going on. And I think even he made the comment in there that most of our meditation is about elongating the gap. So the gap or the rest, doesn't rest not like in the sense of I'm going to lay down and take a nap. Rest in the sense of I don't need to do a whole lot. I just need to hang out with what is happening at that point. So that's the idea behind it. Equanimity is this, again, very balanced state of mind that doesn't need to really do anything because nothing's happening in the mind. But we can, again, have tastes of it by seeing the gap between the thoughts and sort of hanging out in that space. Furthermore, since the knowledge of ultimate reality, that's, again, the wisdom of emptiness, only occurs when the mind is in a state of equipoise, equanimity is said to act as the basis for such knowledge, because we need, once more, a mind that can stay present with that, to have that deeper awareness of emptiness that eventually becomes our, insight into emptiness directly. In addition, it acts as a basis for the prevention of excitement and sinking, as well as all the other root and proximate afflictions, because if you're in that mind of equanimity, none of these other things are arising. Again, non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance. In general, equanimity is the mental factor that keeps the mind balanced and calm without letting it become either carelessly distracted or unclear and dull. Again, those two kind of poles you move between, the distracted, outward excitement kind of stuff and the unclear, dull, inward collapsing sort of stuff. Although it may be weak in an untrained mind, through the practice of constant meditation, it can be developed into a very powerful force. And as I said, it plays a greater role, and we see it more prevalent in the higher, steps to attaining calm abiding. But nonetheless, again, we do get a taste for it when we have those gaps. This is another way that developing calm abiding is presented. Again, I'm just going to touch on it very briefly, and then I think it's about time for us to take our little break. This is a presentation that comes from Maitreya's text. I don't remember the exact source, but it's called the 5 faults and the 8 antidotes. The 5 faults are the things that we have to kind of overcome to develop calm abiding. The antidotes are what are used to address them. And we'll see a lot of familiar terms on here, things that we've looked at throughout this course that have been either part of our the basic mechanics of the mind, such as mindfulness and so on, as well as some of the virtuous mental factors, and of course, some of the things that are afflicted states of mind that we need to overcome. And it all starts with laziness, which we spoke about previously. Laziness has different ways that it manifests. But of course, here, the main one is laziness. It doesn't allow us to get on a cushion and do our meditation, right? It needs to be overcome right from the beginning. The laziness, it doesn't want to meditate, wants to put it off or whatever. We need first faith. Faith was one of the 11 virtuous mental factors, right? It's one of them that's most important, because if we don't have some faith in these teachings and our ability to attain calm abiding, well, then we may not be able to overcome our laziness. But that faith has to move into an aspiration. Aspiration was one of the 5 object determining mental factors or object ascertaining mental factors. Here it's a virtuous aspiration. It's an aspiration to engage in the meditation practice that will lead us to achieving all the great qualities that we can through our meditation. Effort comes from aspiration. If you aspire to do something, then you put effort into accomplishing it, right? First is your faith that, it can happen, your aspiration to move in that direction, and then the effort you need to accomplish it. And eventually that results in pliancy. As I said, you don't see pliancy until in its fully qualified form till you get to the actual state of calm abiding. But nonetheless, it is the outcome of your combating your laziness by engaging in the practice repeatedly, continuously, day in and day out. The second fault that we run into is called here forgetting the instruction. It means forgetting the object. It means that you lose the breath, you lose the Buddha figure that you're meditating on, whatever. It means you have forgotten it. So you need mindfulness, that is non-forgetfulness, that kind of allows you to keep the awareness of the object you're meditating on in the mind. Then the next one, the third one, is when you're not identifying when these 2 factors of laxity and excitement arise, when the mind is starting to become dull and heavy, or when the mind is becoming excited and distracted, to all these other outer things and what have you. What do we need to identify those and then make a correction? We need introspection. We spoke about introspection earlier. It often comes in conjunction with our mindfulness because it's the spy in the corner of the mind. It's not listed as one of the 51 mental factors because it has an aspect of wisdom to it. But this is a spy in the corner of the mind that kind of is observing what is going on and sort of checks in and goes, okay, are you on the object or not? If you have laxity and the mind has become very dull and thick, well, then you notice that you're not with the object. You're in some sort of dark, dull place. If it's the mind of excitement that is out thinking about the ice cream in the fridge and how you'd much rather be, off, eating dessert than sitting there meditating, well, then you've seen that that's going on. Your introspection is just sort of a spy saying, what's happening? Then, on the basis of that, you have the thoughts that are antidotal, that correct it. Okay, it's out here thinking about ice cream. I need to bring it back down to the breath or the object I'm meditating on. Or it's gotten really dull. I need to heighten my awareness, bring it up some so that I have greater clarity to the mind. So again, it's just that tuning of the string again, tightening or loosening it, tightening it, getting that balance to find that middle way. So essentially, this is what you're doing in your developing of calm abiding, is that you're moving through this combating your laxity and excitement so that you can eventually be free from them. Non-application there, the fourth of these faults, is when you aren't applying the antidote. Maybe you see it and you recognize it, but you're not doing the proper fix. Maybe the laxity is feeling like kind of an interesting place to be. You just, are very tired, and so you just hang out there. Or the excitement, again, is much more interesting than watching your breath, so you just keep thinking about that Haagen-Dazs in the ice box or whatever. So you need, of course, the antidote to that is apply the antidotes. Do what you need to do to retune the string and find that middle way point again. This is where equanimity comes into play. It is the antidote when you're over applying. As I said, when you get to that 8th level, of these stages that help you to attain calm abiding, that precede attaining calm abiding, you have overcome all of these obstacles. They aren't a problem anymore, but you're so used to addressing them that you might keep feeling like you need to apply antidotes. So I need to keep tightening the mind or loosening the mind. And yet you don't need to do that at all because the mind is just fine. You've already done the work to remove those. Equanimity is the balance that allows you just to stay and hang out with that. As I said, if you do that, you will eventually go from the 8th to the 9th level, and then the 9th up to the level of calm abiding. Attain fully qualified shamatha with pliancy, and then the work is done. And then you just use that mind as a basis for your analytical meditation and investigating, the various teachings and eventually achieving special insight together with that mind of calm abiding. So I think that's good enough for now for before the break. If you have a question, hold on to it. We're going to take about a 10-minute break. I have 6 minutes after the hour, so give the benefit of the doubt for another minute. So let's say at 17 minutes after, just turned to 7:07 here. So it's about 10 minutes, and we'll have a little break here in the Gompa for people to talk. But if you all want to talk to each other online, you're welcome to do that. Hopefully we're not too disruptive in our talking to make that a problem. But all right, 10 minutes. See you shortly. Pause. Okay, so any questions on what I was talking about at the end there again? And I realize I kind of crammed the entire teaching on achieving calm abiding into just like a little few bits, but know that again, in all the Lamrim texts, there's extensive information, instruction on achieving shamatha. So you'll see that again, I'm sure, many, many times. But yeah, let me.
The attainment of is it the 9th level?
The 9th level
of shamatha. Is it correlated to anything in terms of like enlightenment or becoming an arhat or anything like that? Or
no. Yeah, I think all of you heard online. Louis was asking whether it's kind of what was
correlated with any other attainment.
That word dropped out of my head for some. Correlated with like becoming an arhat versus enlightened or whatever at a higher level. Not really, because again, we're talking about simply the development of concentration, which is huge. And I'm not meaning that it's simply something, negligent. I mean that it is really still just the development of one half of the equation. When we talk about generating an insight into emptiness, which is essential for achieving either foe destroyer, arhat, or Buddha, fully enlightened being, you need to have a union of calm abiding and special insight. Shamatha and vipassana. If you don't have kind of those two together, you haven't really created the conditions, is the understanding we have in this tradition, that will allow you to achieve those results. So you can't just become an arhat by virtue of a meditative stabilization, a level of shamatha or calm abiding. You can become an arhat, though, when you have removed the root of ignorance through uniting those two, uniting calm abiding with special insight. Yeah.
Just as how shamatha has these 9 levels, is there something similar to that with Vipassana, the attainment of Vipassana?
No, I mean, Vipassana is not set out with 9 levels like that, but Vipassana depends, to have fully qualified Vipassana depends upon having shamatha. So we can say we're doing Vipassana meditation and we're doing, analytical meditation, and that's perfectly fine. It is what will get you there. That, again, the whole approach in this tradition is you need these conceptual sort of steps that you go through to get a more and more refined understanding of emptiness and so on. And when you get to that point where you have that, you will have a very powerful mind, but it needs the accompanying factor of shamatha in order to make it fully qualified. So we have this phrase, union of calm abiding and special insight, where you have both of those present in the mind at the same time. And that can still even be conceptually knowing emptiness, but eventually that concept of emptiness falls away and you know emptiness directly. And at that point, the union of calm abiding and special insight, realizing emptiness, that's where you actually begin the process of removing the afflictions and their seeds. And then you eventually remove them completely and become an arhat. And then you remove the knowledge obscurations, the obscurations to becoming a Buddha, which are subtler imprints on the mind. And that will allow you to attain the greater result of Buddhahood. So shamatha, again, is half of the equation of getting there. And it's the basis you need for fully qualified vipassana. But you don't really get the power of the mind until you unite those two. And then your spiritual realizations totally take off at that point. That's why developing shamatha becomes so crucial, right? Because if we don't have that, we can develop a lot of understanding, but it's not very stable, right? It hasn't been integrated into our minds at a much deeper level. So that's the understanding behind that. Thanks for those questions. Good questions tonight. Yeah. Yeah, Jana.
This is more of a comment, but I just wanted to say that there's an FPMT meditation teacher that uses a phrase that really works for me. And he says, rest your mind on the breath.
Rest your mind on the breath. Yeah.
So for me, it removes that.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, all I need to do is just rest my mind on the breath.
Right.
And it kind of takes out that tightness.
You know, what it's alluding to some degree, I think we probably all agree with this, is that the natural state of the mind is to not be distracted and to not be dull. It's to be in that sort of place of rest. And so what we're trying to do is get back into more of a natural state, if you will. Just like when we talk about Buddha nature is the mind that is fundamentally pure and not polluted by any of these afflictions and what have you. So we're always trying to go back to kind of how do we get back in touch with what is the deepest nature of our being, of our minds, which is a place of rest, a place of clarity, a place of stability, a place of wisdom, a place of insight. That's sort of what's underneath the surface of all of that. But, it takes a while to get there, but I like that phrase. I'm actually, hearing it from Rasmus that day in the event, well, it was like a 2-hour period that they led of doing kind of some meditations. He used it frequently there, and I found it really useful. Yeah.
It's kind of like, I don't need to be doing anything, but
Right.
I need to be, meditate. I need to, and that rest your mind on the breath. Oh yeah. Okay. Just rest it.
And I guess the thing that is, we have to remind ourselves, it doesn't mean it doesn't take any effort at all.
Right.
It just means that it's not the type of effort that we're used to doing, right?
Yes.
Break through all of this and get there. It's like, I need the effort that is not allowing any of that other stuff to come in so that I can stay in a place of rest, to kind of create a safe space for that to flourish, if you will. It's interesting. Meditation's all about, the complement to what we're doing in this course, getting to know your mind, knowing all of these things. But then meditation is the tool whereby we can investigate. Let's carry on. If you do have some additional questions, hopefully we'll have some time at the end. But I want to talk about these 4 really briefly. These 4 are called variable mental factors, because in dependence upon your motivation and the other mental factors that kind of come along for the ride or that even influence the ride, they become either virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral. So these 4, again, are highlighted. You might notice, of course, one thing I haven't mentioned, I don't think up to this point, is this list of 51 mental factors is by no means complete. There are other states of mind. The one that always comes to mind when I go through this is fear. Where is fear? I would put fear on the same list. Fear can be actually very wholesome, right? In the Lam Rim teachings, the course we're going to do starting next month is on, hard advice for death and dying. Meditating on death can produce some fear, but it's a wholesome fear, hopefully. If it becomes kind of neurotic fear, well, then we have a problem. It's meant to induce us to take this life seriously and do what we need to do with it, because death is certain for us and can come at any time. But fear can also be something that leads us to engage in non-virtue, right? It can become very afflicted depending upon what we're doing with it. These 4 are kind of similar, but depending upon the accompanying thoughts, the things that are influencing it, and your motivation, you can actually change these from virtuous to non-virtuous, or non-virtuous to virtuous, or either of those to neutral. Sleep. Let's talk about sleep first. Sleep makes the mind unclear. It gathers the sense consciousnesses inward and renders the mind incapable of apprehending the body, right? You go into kind of a mental space in sleep. It's a subtler state of mind where we don't have much cognizance of the physical world in our body, right? In general, no. Sleep is kind of shutting all that out. Sleeping out of attachment and laziness is destructive, is, not productive. Sleeping because the body is tired is neutral, right? We all have to sleep. They say that when you develop deeper states of concentration, you don't necessarily need to sleep. That kind of fills in for it because you get the rest and restoration that you normally get from sleep in your meditation. But most of us need to sleep because the body gets tired, right? And so we just lay down and we rest the body. Sleeping with the intention to resume our compassionate activities after resting is virtuous. So you can make your sleep virtuous by holding very positive thoughts as you go to sleep that influence that and make it something that can be, you do this because you want to be more productive with all the various activities, virtuous things you do than when you waken from that rest. One thing I might mention is many of you are familiar with the practice of Tonglen. I'm not going to go into it in this course, but River Rinpoche, wonderful Lama, I know some of you here had some connections with. He was quite amazing, one of my teachers as well, although I didn't have as many teachings from him as I would have liked to. He said that when you go to sleep doing Tonglen, where as you breathe in, you're breathing in suffering of other beings in particular, and then as you breathe out, you're breathing out everything you have to create happiness for them. So as you're breathing in and breathing out with Tonglen in your mind, you're creating virtuous sleep so that your whole sleep becomes virtuous by virtue of your having those thoughts as you enter into sleep. So know that there are many different ways that we can make our sleep virtuous. These were just examples, but it is good to try to avoid the non-virtuous sleep, just lazing around and just being attached to sleep and, can be pleasant to sleep at times, but we want to really just see it as the same way we see it as food. Food is a way to replenish our bodies, right? It's not meant to be something that you indulge in and generate all kinds of attachment for and can't wait to, shove every piece of it in your mouth because it's the pleasure so incredible and whatever. You just want to say, okay, I need to eat. I'll eat stuff that's pleasant enough to eat, but I don't need to have this whole craving, grasping, hungry ghost kind of mind while I'm eating. So sleep is the same way. Just go to bed, get the rest that you need. Try to bring some virtuous thoughts into it. Just like if you're eating, you can bring virtuous thoughts of giving the pleasure of that food to others, helping them to have what will not just sustain their bodies, but bring them, more wholesome states of mind and what have you. Regret. Regret is a word we talk about a lot in regard to our purification of negative karma, right? Regret regards an appropriate or inappropriate action that we have performed of our own accord or under pressure as something we do not wish to repeat. Regretting negativities is virtuous, as we do in our purification, right? We have that very strong regret that says, I really regret that I told this lie or that I did this particular, action, whatever. And therefore, I want to purify those. I want to confess and purify those actions. But regretting our constructive actions is non-virtuous, right? Sometimes that happens, right? Maybe, you see somebody who's on the street, asks you for money, and you give them, maybe all you have is like a 20 in your wallet or something, and you say, oh, I really want to give them money, and you give them a 20, but then the rest of the time you're regretting that you gave them the money because now you go to the store and you don't have any cash or something. I'm just using a kind of example off the top of my head, but we have to be careful again. We don't want to regret the virtuous actions that we've done. We want to rejoice in those and really feel good about whatever we've done. So regret can go either way. You can have a very wholesome regret that is regretting the negativities, or you can have an unwholesome regret that is regretting your virtuous actions. I guess it could be neutral too, regretting, that I don't know what would be an example of that. Regretting that you didn't wash the dishes before you went to bed because you have to face them in the morning. I mean, not really a big thing, virtue or non-virtue, right? Investigation, and the next one that we're going to look at, analysis. Let's look at these two kind of together. Investigation is a more general examination, a kind of course engagement. It arises depending on intention or wisdom and examines an object in general, not really getting into a real specific analysis, as the next one is going to be called. Investigating the meaning of impermanence, for example, is virtuous. And impermanence is the quality of everything that's conditioned, arises from causes and conditions, changes momentarily. It doesn't stay the same. That's the subtle impermanence. And there's gross impermanence, which is death and dying and so on. We'll look at that in that course coming up next month. Whereas investigating someone's faults with the intention to criticize them is non-virtuous, right? But this is a kind of general investigation, just kind of an observation of things and beginning to get our head around something. Investigation often will proceed to analysis. Analysis is a subtle engagement. It arises in dependence upon intention or wisdom and analyzes the object in detail, analyzing the nature of reality, emptiness, with the motivation of bodhicitta is virtuous, but analyzing how to make more efficient weapons with the intention to kill is destructive, right? And this happens in our world, happens here in New Mexico, at Los Alamos and what have you, where weapons of mass destruction are produced and what have you. So again, we see that investigation and analysis in and of themselves, it depends upon the circumstances. What are you investigating and what are you analyzing? Again, one is coarser than the other. The analysis is more fine discrimination, kind of getting in there and understanding the ins and outs of something. Whereas investigation is just a kind of more cursory examination of something. But what are you examining? What are you looking at? You're trying to pick other people apart, and are you trying to do something to improve your own mind? These are two different things. So again, that's just with all of these four, and I would say there are probably a number of other things that could be included in the list. But once more, recall that all these 51 were set out by the Buddha because they're really relevant to our practice. And so these are ways that, again, we have to be kind of attentive to what's happening with our mind. So I think I went through all of that then. The final sort of exercises that you're welcome to do, in the kind of aftermath of this course. The first mindfulness exercise had to do with distraction. When distraction occurs, particularly in meditation, notice that and work with any of the antidotes discussed. Reflect on the value of concentration and mindfulness and how you don't want the mind then to get distracted. Again, not super tightening the mind, but letting those distractions sort of fall away. Secondly, apply the traditional remedies to a distracted mind. Again, the 9-round breathing meditation and so on, the ones that we looked at earlier. Number 2, while meditating, keep in mind the goals of achieving mental pliancy, where the mind is serviceable, and equanimity, where the mind is no longer affected by excitement and laxity. Try to use that as inspiration to maintain single-pointed focus on the object of meditation. Again, the pliancy in its fully qualified form we're not going to have, but we will notice some increase in our serviceability of our minds, maybe our bodies to some degree, as we generate more meditation, more practice. But certainly equanimity we can begin to get a taste for. Again, the kind of the gap, the space between the thoughts where we can hang out and abide and rest. As you were saying, Jenna, rest on the breath or rest on the meditation object. Number 3 is working with those 4 variable mental factors that we looked at: sleep, regret, investigation, analysis. Try to make them virtuous rather than non-virtuous, primarily by bringing to mind more positive motivations and virtuous mental factors when engaging in those mental states. So in particular, sleep. We spend, I don't know how many hours all of you sleep. I sleep right about 7 hours every night. That's a good chunk of every day. And if we're just spending that time in either a neutral mode, hopefully not a non-virtuous mode, but at least a neutral mode, well, we're wasting, in effect, 7 hours, not making it more virtuous. So again, practicing Tonglen, as I said, I think that teaching is in the book called, it's this book on bodhicitta. I can't remember the name of it right now. How to Generate Bodhicitta, I think, is all that it's called. You can get that from Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. It was really sweet the way he put it in there. Is like, you can totally transform all of your sleep into something virtuous. Breathing in suffering, breathing out happiness. Just do that as you go to sleep. And then those thoughts kind of influence your practice throughout your more or less unconscious state, your dreaming state, what have you. And then, of course, just, having more positive thoughts about the nature of sleep being an aid, a boon to our practice, that we can get up refreshed and engage in more virtuous activity. Regret, of course, try not to regret things that are virtuous that you've done, and try to have a healthy regret for anything you've done that's non-virtuous. And then again, using our investigation and analysis in much more constructive ways. So I just have a few little closing comments from, I think this is from Geshe Rabten, that kind of are a nice way to look at what we've done in this course of getting to know your mind. And then we'll see if there are any questions. To persist in trying to manipulate the external material world in order to achieve happiness and dispel suffering is like being concerned about fighting a battle outside, unaware that the enemy is dwelling indoors. This is the whole Buddhist perspective, is that the work is not external, the work is internal. In fact, that's what the word Nangpa means in Buddhist. It means an inner being. We're an inner being. We're taking the teachings and applying them in ourselves, as an antidote, a means to overcome what is problematic. Without dealing directly with our own psychological makeup, no real happiness will ever be found within external situations. We shall always find ourselves facing the same problems as the person who does not realize that the enemy dwells within his own house. Thus, the importance of being aware of the way in which the mental factors affect our lives cannot be stressed enough. That's again why I wanted to share this course with all of you and give you a taste for this. There's deeper investigations of it that become a little more scholarly, but are touching on the same ideas. But the most important thing is to make it practical. How do we use this information? How do we identify these things going on in our minds and actually apply them in our lives? So hopefully I've done that. I don't know. But you have the teachings now to kind of rely upon and to work with. Certainly even Venerable Gyatso's book, as I said, it's got a lot more in it than just the mental factors, but give you some appreciation for that. And I would say again, in closing advice, just to work with, again, what feels like the most pressing thing for you in your life. And some people do have issues with anger. Look at the world that we're living in, and it's easy to have anger arise, right? To get upset at what's going on. And it might feel, again, that there is an unsettling quality to all of that we don't like having. Well, we might need to find antidotes to that and work on that and lessening that. Recognizing, as I said, when I went through anger, that there are some forms of anger that are perhaps more compassionate based, where we are upset at something that is affecting so many other people and causing them pain and suffering. And we want that rectified out of that mind of compassion. But remember to include the perpetrators in that whole thought process. But nonetheless, think of, again, go into your own sort of therapeutic mind, looking at your own mind, trying to be your own therapist, saying, what is going on for me right now? What is it that will be most healthy for my state of mind going forward? And begin to do that work. And that's where it starts. I will say that in the Lojong, the mind training teachings and the slogans of Geshe Chikawa in his 7-point mind training, he says to kind of start with the biggest affliction, the biggest problem, like the worst roommate. If we've got all these kind of crazy roommates in our minds, well, who's the biggest troublemaker for us? Who's the one that's causing us the most upset? There's some benefit to that, right? Because if we pick out that one and we say, okay, I'm going to work on this guy, I'm going to work on making that more manageable. Well, then we have kind of a major feather in our cap, right? If when we accomplish that, it should be easier to kind of deal with the lesser roommates, to kind of work with them and to overcome those sorts of problems. So there's a lot of wisdom in that. But again, I think it's up to each of us. Some may find that tackling that big one, you might need more confidence by tackling smaller ones. And then when you have enough smaller ones that you've tackled, then you go, okay, now I think I can roll up my sleeves and do the work on that larger, more problematic or troublesome state of mind. So that's the idea behind this, is you just kind of work with them. Don't think that you have to take everything we've covered in 11 sessions and apply it all immediately, because you're going to go crazy, right? You just can't do that. Have an understanding of how a particular affliction works. Remember, going back to towards the beginning, we talked about the 6 factors that give rise to an affliction. The seed, the basis, the object, the mistaken conceptualizations. And then we had the ones that were more external, the influence of bad companions, misleading friends, the kind of societal things that we bring into that inform our minds. And then, of course, habit, the things we do more habitually. Remember that all of those are operating with regard to these to some degree. Maybe not every one of them, but certainly the first three and often the other ones. So just work on your own understanding and developing an awareness of one affliction. Just start with one affliction and then see where it goes. Begins that process of changing. But again, also use what we've learned in this course of supporting our own meditation practice and so on, and the need for that as a way to supplement that work so that you have deeper tools that can be used to remove those afflictions eventually. Let's go ahead and open it up to any questions or comments, anyone online or here in the Gompa. No questions, comments? Okay, well, again, you've got all the materials. That drive, by the way, those files will be out on that drive as long as I'm around. I don't go and like delete drives or anything. That folder will be there so you can continue to access it. You might bookmark it or something if you want to go back to any of that. And I will post the presentation slides as well as the 9-round breathing meditation with the additional instruction that I gave out there within the next day, I hope. I want to share with you and do this prayer tonight. I've been meaning to do it here, but we just have been ending so early that I want to, we do this in the Thursday morning regional prayer meetings that we do. That's at, let me stop this. Got something weird on there. These are the prayer sessions that are led by Venerable Angie generally. I led them the last few Thursdays because she was on retreat. But anyway, this is a prayer that Lama Zopa Rinpoche translated. The Vajra speech of Maha Siddha, Tong Tong Gyalpo, words of truth pacifying the danger of weapons. We've been doing this prayer for a while, but particularly with what's all going on in our world, particularly with the United States being involved in conflict in the Middle East and all of what's happening to the countries there, as well as, Ukraine and Russia continuing, Israel with Gaza and Lebanon, and just so many places where there's war, weapons. We want to kind of do this with our bodhicitta motivation to remove all these obstacles to the well-being of people in our world, ourselves included. Om Mani Padme Hum. Great loving, victorious one, Arya sublime, compassionate eye, looking one, wrathful, victorious, Hayagriva, perfect, pure Tara, and so forth, objects of refuge whose holy names eliminate all dangers upon mere hearing, who are compassionate in nature, please pay attention to me. When the sentient beings of the time of quarreling and of flourishing of the 5 degenerations are tormented by fighting and intense suffering from the explosion of a great ocean of evil karma and jealousy, please dry this ocean up by the strength of your transcendental wisdom and compassion. Also by letting fall a great nectar rain of loving kindness on the transmigrating beings whose hatred is a blazing fire. Please grant your blessings for happiness and auspiciousness to increase by their recognizing each other as being like parents. Through your defeating the multitude of vicious evil spirits who, by entering someone's mental continuum, change it instantly into the mind of an asura. From now on, may they never roam in this region. Please also cause all the sentient beings who have died in war from now on to abandon all evil karma, the cause and result, and be miraculously reborn in blissful land. Please also lead all others to that pure land. Please cause all those who are born and die to have long lives and not have sicknesses, to stop all their quarreling and fighting, and to enjoy a life in the 10 virtues. Please make rain fall at the right time, harvest to always be good, and auspiciousness to increase in all habitats and for all inhabitants. By the ultimate reality which is pure in nature, unbetraying cause and result, which has that ultimate reality, and the compassionate Guru, mind-sealed deity, and rare sublime ones, may my pure and extensive prayers be accomplished. I think that this prayer will be accomplished immediately to pacify all of this in our world and all worlds of beings. Might mention that, this was actually translated by Rinpoche on September 11th, 2001, on 9/11. So, but anyway, yes, Mary Jo, sorry, you had a comment.
Oh, no, could you post that prayer on
Sure, I
in
can put
the
that
folders?
in the drive as well. I'll put that in the handout. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be
Good.
fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, sure, no problem. Okay. So we're going to do our dedications now. Jana has the list, I think, of those. If you need to add additional names to the list, you can put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand after she's finished reciting the list.
We dedicate the merit created by listening to this teaching to all beings everywhere. We dedicate for the health and long lives of all our precious teachers, that they may continue to teach us and guide us. We dedicate for all those experiencing obstacles, specifically Jana, Jeffrey, Wyatt, Alyssa, Matt, Adrienne, Jesse Robinson, and Catherine. We dedicate for all those experiencing illness, specifically Lori, Amanda, Rob, Allie J, Karen A, Kelly Jo, Emily, Dorcas, Rolf, Bill Waugh, Allie Pacheco, Kate, and Anne Marie. We dedicate for all those who are dying or who have died in the last 49 days, specifically all those who have died due to war and violence: Lydia Ruiz, Peggy Ness, Ted Winston, Sweetie the cat, Kopi the dog, Lou DeSantis, Ray Handrick, Michael Tilson Thomas, and Michelle Robinson.
We have one addition from Mary Jo. Add Hillary B. Hillary with one L.
In which?
In ill and obstacle. Two categories.
Okay. Hillary with one L. Oh,
B. Last name.
as in boy.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other additions to the list that anyone wants to put on there? Okay. So for those beings whose names were recited, as well as all those who we've been asked to pray for or offered to pray for, we dedicate for their well-being, removal of all their suffering, so they can attain happiness in this world and beyond. Let's go ahead and look at I got to go back to the PowerPoint. Sorry. That's where it is. Okay. It's my PDF files. Okay. Now we'll conclude with the dedication prayers that Jana will lead us in.
Dedication prayer, once in Tibetan. Gewadi yor du dam ma de so Glo Sho.
Oops, sorry.
John Chur Sam Cho Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyurchik Ke Wan Yang Pa Me Pa Yang Gong De Gong Du Pel War Shuk. And long life prayers for His Holiness Dalai Lama. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Pravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang Father and Sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. While holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice,
You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace.
What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
Okay, thank you all for attending tonight and throughout this course, and hope, again, you've enjoyed going through some of this material and having some additional tools to work with. It's just so you know, next Thursday there will be a video of Lama Yeshe teaching on emptiness, Mahamudra. And so hopefully you can join for that. I'm going to be on retreat for a couple of weeks. And then on the following, Eloise will be here to lead a little kind of informal discussion on emptiness. It'll be kind of fun to just kind of work with that concept and in that sort of group dynamic. So thank you, Eloise, for doing that. And then I will be back May 21st. And again, we'll start the Heart Advice for Death and Dying course. That's 5 sessions. And kind of a deeper look at death and dying in this tradition and how we prepare for it. So, okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Appreciate everyone.
Don,
Be-
thank you for the whole course.
Thank you. Thank you so
You're very welcome.
much.